Pandora Syndrome. Written by April Walleen. Read by April Walleen. Directed and recorded by Andreas Gallego. Chapter 5. Your Average Not-So-Average Day. Deep within my cement prison, my tear ducts strained to work as emotion choked me. If there'd been any moisture left in my body, my face would be streaming with tears. The bittersweetness of those days still pained me. Jack had taken it all as a matter of course, but to this day, whenever I thought of what I'd done to my poor brother, sure, he'd been up and living life like any normal person, but I'd killed him. You don't just forget something like that. It was a hard time for me those early days. I'd needed to quickly come to grips with what I was and learn how to control it. On top of that, Remy had brought to light my power over the dead, though he didn't seem to know why I had it. Let's not even get started on all that mysterious talk about pledges and not breaking oaths. Reluctantly, I decided to accept my lot. There was no point in fighting it. It wasn't like I could go back in time and change my becoming a vampire. After all, if not for Remy, I'd be dead. The least I could do was not become a menace to society by letting my powers get the better of me. Remy's words had hit hard. I was a weapon. I needed to learn to use them, or the person hunting me might just get me after all. Besides, Remy had been nice once I understood what was going on. Spending time with a handsome man wouldn't exactly be torture. So, I would embrace the new gifts and vampiric lifestyle. I smiled mentally as I remembered how often I had nearly derailed the training Remy tried so hard to instill in me. I rolled over in my bed and wrapped my arms around my Yoda pillow, feeling surprisingly well rested. I'd had a late night, or should I say day. Me, a newly minted vampire, necro, whatever, and my newly raised zombie brother had spent all night battling each other in video game land. We'd played until well past sunrise. I'd felt the sun coming up. It was unpleasant to say the least. My skin seemed to crawl at its mere rising, even though I was nicely sequestered away in a dark room. It was uncomfortable, but I wasn't necessarily tired. I was just happy I wasn't knocked unconscious at first light. I'd been worried about that after my little nap on the front lawn. While hanging out with Jack, I'd tried to broach the subject of my attacking him, but he just waved me off. He was maddeningly okay with the whole thing, and that scared me a little. Was Jack really okay with it, or was he so under my control that he couldn't think ill of me? I blanched at that thought. As the sun rose throughout the day, light began peeking through my curtains. I felt like I was coming down from a euphoric high, the coaster rolling slowly to a stop. I was left feeling hot, achy, and listless. I just felt wrong all over. I tossed and turned uncomfortably. At some point, I'd finally managed to sleep. Luckily, when I woke again, I found that the air was cooler and my achiness had disappeared. Through the curtains, dim pastel light signified the setting of the sun. My thoughts turned to Remy then, and my heart leapt. I longed to see him. What was wrong with me? Flopping over in my bed, I shook off the maddening urge for my new, what did he call himself? My maker? I'd managed, somewhat, to accept the fact that I was a vampire, my brother's newly undead status, and even my necro-whatever powers. Yet somehow confronting the intense feelings I had for a man I'd only known for a couple days was pushing me over the edge. I opened my eyes, knowing I couldn't just lay here and dwell. I needed to get up, needed to do something. Hiding in my room wasn't going to do me any favors. I had to get up and face the day, night. I sat up and nearly screamed when I found Remy sitting on the edge of my bed, staring down at me. How long had he been there? "Good evening," he greeted with a faintly amused smile. "You should try this new thing called knocking," I told him, trying to hide my shock. "Apologies. After our previous conversation, I was not certain that you would let me in," he replied. "Now that you have rested, we have the urgent matter of your training to begin." "Hang on, don't change the subject. It's not okay to just come in my room, sit on my bed, and watch me sleep," I said, running a hand through my hair, suddenly conscious of the fact that it was sticking up at all angles. He spread his hands in an innocent gesture. "When a lady's door is unlocked, it is usually an invitation to come in." He smirked at me. I rolled my eyes. "Jesus, you sound like some old-fashioned rake ready to debauch the lady of the manor." His smirk did not waver. "How old are you anyway?" "By your standards, ancient." "Well," I said, Modern girls do not like being stared at while they're sleeping. That's the kind of thing serial killers do. He looked a little concerned. Well, by definition, technically. I lifted a hand to stop him. Okay, look, this is awkward. All supernatural blood swapping and life-saving aside, we don't really know each other, I replied. I have come to amend that. He stood and then bowed slightly. Let us start over. It is good to see you, he told me with an apologetic smile. I smiled in spite of myself. It's good to see you too, Remy. I looked him over. He was dressed in jeans and a black V-neck t-shirt, as opposed to my rumpled Wonder Woman t-shirt and underwear. Embarrassed and suddenly self-conscious, I smoothed a strand of hair behind one ear and pulled up the comforter to hide myself. He turned to examine the trappings of my room. His gaze wandered over my collection of superhero figurines. The look on his face said it all. It was the what kind of 12-year-old's mess did I just walk into look. My semi-unpacked boxes were open, revealing stacks of comics, movie memorabilia, and half-unfurled posters. He glanced back at the little R2-D2 pillow I'd been strangling in my sleep. Is that supposed to be a pillow? He asked me. Hey, I shot back, used to defending my taste in decor. I didn't question the ancient vases and prehistoric paintings of yourself, you vain bastard. I smiled and looked around for a pair of jeans to pull on. Those vain portraits are to remind me of the many lives I've lived. I find they help me keep perspective in this eternal existence. He smirked back at me then. But, fair enough, Pandora. He nodded. Don't call me that, I hissed at him. And I need coffee before we train or whatever. And I don't think Jack has any blood-flavored Sanka. I located a pair of jeans at the base of my nightstand, swiftly snatched them off the floor, and shimmied into them. This Dora name you go by does not suit you, he replied simply. But I will see to your coffee if you wish, though I doubt you will find caffeine particularly satisfying anymore. Either way, dress yourself. We're going out. Out? I called as he walked out of the room. Out where? I stood staring up at the Neon Bonds grocery sign in confusion. It seemed painfully bright against the blackness of the night. We're going grocery shopping? I asked. This is the first and perhaps most crucial of your lessons, he told me. I don't think they sell blood here, I replied. While you should never underestimate the usefulness of buying blood from the butcher in dire straits, this is not the lesson you are here to learn. In order to move about in society, you must be able to appear human. I looked down at myself. I thought I looked pretty human. My vampiric change hadn't altered me much physically. I was pale and dark and kind of gothy, but I'd always been like that. I was wearing blue jeans and a comfortably worn Rocky Horror Picture Show t-shirt. It is not your shirt, Remy replied. That mind reading of his was really getting on my nerves. Your whole body has changed, he continued. When you are around a crowd of people, the scent of blood will pique your hunger. It is something you will need to recognize and control. That aside, your muscles have been altered. Therefore, you do not move like a human being any longer. We are here to teach you how to blend in among them. So I have to what? Slow down? He nodded. I frowned at that. I'd entertained thoughts of learning how to move at the speed of thought or punch through walls, not slow down 101. Though I had to admit, the charge I felt from being near so many people was intoxicating. And a grocery store will teach me this? I asked doubtfully. You need to be among normal people in order to survive. Your instincts will tell you to rely on your new gifts, but you cannot let that happen. This couldn't be nearly as hard as he was making it seem. You're serious? I am. If you do not learn this lesson and learn it well, we will have to move out of the city to a less crowded area in order to complete your training. Move? I asked. I'm not moving. I just got here to LA and California is my home, I said, picturing some awful podunk hillbilly outland in the Midwest. That was all the motivation I needed. You weren't going to catch this city girl playing Green Acres. He nodded at me, seeing that his point had been made. Lesson 1. Move slowly. Just follow and mimic my movements, Remy instructed and started towards the doors. I moved to follow, to walk slowly, but the muscles in my legs felt too charged, too electrified, and I instantly shot past him. When I looked back, I saw that I'd taken 6 steps to his 1. Damn. Slowly, he reiterated patiently, catching up to me. Again, he directed, and took a couple slow steps forward. I tried to match his cadence, fighting the urge to pass him. But it was irritating to walk so slowly. It felt like I was dragging my feet or walking through water. My body did not like it. He'd been right. The muscles in my legs wanted to run, to break free, and see just how fast I could go. Taking a deliberate breath, I continued on, forcing myself to keep pace with him. I looked around, noticing that we were indeed pacing the few people heading into the store. Maybe I could do this after all. Suddenly, I froze as I caught the smell of blood. I quickly tracked it to the shining entrance of the store where shoppers were entering and exiting with arms full of grocery bags. Feeling a little drunk off the scent, I felt my fangs nudging at the roof of my mouth, itching to come down. Remy had given me blood before we left his place, satisfying my hunger, but the smell of fresh plasma was strong and distracting. My eyes went to Remy's. He nodded knowingly. "It is difficult, is it not?" he asked, coming a little closer. "Lesson 2, he told me, turning my gaze towards the hapless shoppers. "See them, know they are there, but do not let it overwhelm you. Relax. Breathe. You control your urge, not the other way around. In the end, it is just that. An urge, nothing more unless you give in to it." I felt my lips peel back into a snarl. The same energies that made me want to run drew me toward the store. "Listen to me, Tyro," Remy said firmly, taking my hand. "You control the hunger. Breathe." I nodded and then did as he suggested and took a long breath. Slowly, I felt my body relax and my fangs still. My heart eased and the looming panic ebbed. "How is that?" he asked after a moment. I nodded again. "Better. Controlled, I think." "Good," he smiled. "Let us up the stakes." Hand in hand, he led me towards the store. I grew nervous as we approached, afraid of what I might do. The demented part of my brain pictured an utter bloodbath in the cereal aisle. Limbs and sinew, and Remy gripped my hand a little harder, pulling me from the grim thoughts he had no doubt picked up on. He gave me a reassuring smile, and I took another slow breath, steeling myself for what was to come. When we finally entered the Vons, about a decade later, Remy began leading me up and down the aisles at an even slower pace. It was busy, but not too crowded as the late-night shoppers bustled around. Between the scents of blood and supermarket smells of food and cleaning products, it was an effort to keep myself from becoming completely overwhelmed by my senses. "Settle," Remy soothed me then. "Blend in with the populace. Your very being depends on it. Yeah, no pressure." When we reached the produce section, he instructed me to pick up one of the bright, shiny apples on display. I looked at him sideways, but did as he said. I grabbed for the apple, and immediately crushed it into applesauce. Someone nearby gasped, and I turned to see a scrubby-looking old woman staring at my hand with wide eyes. When she noticed me looking, she quickly turned and hurried off in the opposite direction. "Too fast, too rough," Remy admonished, handing me a handkerchief. An honest-to-God handkerchief. "You can put a dent in a car with little effort. Picking up an apple requires delicacy." As we went, it became easier to tell if I was moving at an appropriate speed or not by the attention I garnered from the employees or patrons. After scaring the daylights out of several store clerks and crushing a few canned goods, I finally managed to slow my movements enough to look and act reasonably human. I wasn't perfect, but I was getting the hang of it. We might have a few broken items to pay for at the end, but it was better than inciting a mob of angry pitchfork-wielding, torch-bearing peasants. I groaned as Remy slowly turned me down yet another aisle. My instincts roared for me to move. I wanted to zip into the parking lot like the Flash and lift cars like Superman, but I knew those were red flags. I began to feel tired then. The restraint was wearing on me. Remy moved closer to me, the smell of him lighting up my senses. I was thankful as his suffusion of sandalwood and musk dampened the terrible disinfectant smell of the grocery store. My head swam in relief. "That is enough for one evening. Let us go," he told me, his lips quirking into a slight smile. We slowly left the store, crossed the parking lot, and then headed off into the night. We didn't speak, just walked, once again hand in hand. I couldn't think about that too closely. I was too tired to wax and wane over the possible ramifications of the simple gesture. After a while, we came to a park. The place was dark. Even with my new eyesight, there were no houses or buildings in sight. I didn't even think places like this existed in LA. "It is time to get some exercise," he told me as we continued along. "You are wound up and in need of an expenditure." I was feeling tired, but the thought of finally letting loose excited me. I wanted to run, to jump, to explode. Suddenly, Remy stopped. I'd become so used to walking slow that I barely managed to avoid crashing into him. He turned to me, and we stood nearly nose to nose. With a smirk, he leaned in the last inch of space between us and whispered, "Catch me." Then he disappeared. I turned on the spot, wondering where he'd gone, but there was neither hide nor hair of him. I took a deep breath and suddenly caught his scent on the wind. I followed it. My feet were itching to sprint after him, but I kept in control. Finally, I found him leaning against a tree over a dozen yards away. He nodded in approval. "Are you ready?" "For?" I smiled back. "To be vampires." With that, he smirked and then disappeared again. I tracked Remy's scent again, and was successful, but he disappeared as soon as I caught up with him. Again I followed. Again he disappeared. On and on it went until I began to notice a pattern in his movements, the slight lean of his body before he would take off. Strangely, I felt just as playful as I had the night I'd woken up as a vampire, when I'd had this strange urge to sneak up on Remy in his basement. Before long, I started to anticipate his movements, guessing where Remy would go and hitting the spot just seconds behind him. A carnal growl of excitement rose from my throat as we played cat and mouse. Soon I was pacing him, meeting Remy at his exact location each time he landed there. Faster and faster we went until I finally beat him to his location, tackling him to the ground like a predator its prey. In my excitement, I could feel my fangs nudging at the roof of my mouth, itching to be let free. "You're doing quite well, Pandora," he said, looking up at me from the ground. I smiled proudly. That's when he lunged up, taking my shoulders, and twisted until I was trapped beneath him. I stared up at Remy, at his face, his lips. With a blush, I remembered the kiss we'd shared in the back lot of the Viper Room, the sparks that ignited between us on the night I'd been shot. Dumbfounded, I stared up into his impossibly bright, silvery blue eyes. Remy's smirk faded then. In that moment, I wish I'd been the one who could read minds. He leaned in close, and I closed my eyes in anticipation. Then, just when I thought our lips might touch, he stopped. I looked up at him curiously. That's when the smirk returned and he suddenly disappeared again. My blood heated. "You little sneak," I murmured in amusement and took off after him. This catching and tackling went on almost until sunrise. I woke up in a giant fluffy bed. It was usually hard for me to rest in new places, but I'd fallen right to sleep. Turning to my side, I examined the nearly black room and wondered, if I were still human, would I be able to see anything at all? I could make out nearly all the details in the furniture, even though Remy had said the room was light-tight. I was in one of the spare bedrooms at Remy's little mansion. I'd picked the most modestly decorated as my sleeping quarters. The other ones were just too stuffy. This one was plush, but not adorned with any old paintings or oriental vases I could accidentally break. I seemed to have woken up early since I could feel that the sun was up. I rolled back over, hoping to go back to sleep, but it was no use. I was up for the night. God, switching my entire schedule was going to take some getting used to. So, with a huff, I sat up and stretched. I was a little sore from last night's training. Then again, it could just be the sun's influence. I started to imagine vampire yoga and quickly stopped myself. People joked about bending themselves into pretzels. With my new heightened abilities, I didn't want to find out just how pretzel-y I could get. Standing, I pulled on the overly luxurious robe Remy left for me and made my way into the corridor. When we'd returned from our little outing last night, I'd been too tired for a tour of the house. I doubted he had a video game system, but there had to be a TV. I examined my surroundings and found that Remy's room was just across the hall from mine. Should I wake him? My blood heated at the thought. What if he slept naked? Blood rushed to my cheeks. Catching myself, I forced visions of Remy's well-defined chest from my mind. To my left was the kitchen, living room, and all the other fancy rooms I didn't have names for. There was also the cellar of freezer-burned coma victims. My stomach roiled longingly at the thought of blood, but I was so not going down there by myself. To my right was undiscovered territory, and hopefully a TV I could watch. Quietly, I began peeking in doorways, hoping to find some place to wallow the day away until Remy got up. All I found were more bedrooms, a couple storage closets, and a bathroom. I realized then that I was in need. Yes, apparently big bad vampires still needed to pee. After relieving myself, I followed the staircase leading to the lower level. I silently prayed that it didn't somehow lead into the cellar. At the bottom of the stair, I found a subterranean hallway lined with doors. Now I knew why Remy must have picked the place. It was severely lacking windows. The benefit of a house partially built into the side of a hill. Peeking into a room on my right, I was suddenly assaulted by a musty smell. It was a familiar scent, one that I only encountered in bookstores and libraries. I flipped a wall switch, and lights high in the ceiling came to life, revealing a room filled wall to wall with books. My jaw dropped. Though I shouldn't have been surprised. In Remy's long life, he would have undoubtedly collected a ton of books. Well, it wasn't a TV, but it would do. There had to be something I could read in here. Slowly, I perused the shelves and was immediately disappointed. The first several rows of books weren't even in English. As I went on, I discovered books in all different languages. Guess I needed to find the English section. When I did, I was sad to find that most were written in old Shakespearean-ish dialect. Come on, I moaned aloud. I just needed something to pass the time. Determined, I continued along and was vastly relieved when I began to see works by J.R.R. Tolkien and Douglas Adams. Scanning the collected works, he had everything from science fiction to history. I noticed several books on different wars written by different sides. Too complicated for light reading, but fascinating nonetheless. Then a section of rather worn-looking books caught my eye. One of the spines read Modern versus Ancient Werewolves. I blanched a little. Werewolves? Please tell me werewolves didn't exist. I hoped it was merely fiction. There were books on witches, ghosts, gargoyles, mummies, and everything else I never wanted to see outside of a horror movie. I silently steeled myself against that realization. Then, I had a sudden epiphany and began searching the books. It wasn't long until I found the relevant tomes. There were several books on vampires, no surprise there, but only one rather thin book on necromancy. I might as well do some research while I was up. Maybe I would even find something that could clue me in on my killer's motivations. It had to be because of my weird talent with the dead. I certainly couldn't see any other reason. It was the only thing unique to me. Unless, of course, one of the many guys I'd rebuffed that evening were so pissed that they thought I had to die, which seemed unlikely. I pulled down a few books and was ready to curl up in a plush armchair when I heard whispering voices. My heart clenched. Why was I hearing them now of all times? I felt like they were trying to guide me somewhere. Deciding to go with it, I listened, moved to my right, and looked up. There, on one of the high shelves crammed in the corner, was a solid black book. I hadn't noticed it there. The thing was beyond black, so black that it seemed to suck in the light around it. Stretching up on my tiptoes, I grabbed the book and was surprised. It was the same book I'd found amongst my own collection when I'd moved from my mother's. I stared at it in awe. Clearly, it must have been another edition, but the book seemed too oddly unique to have two copies. I guess I was wrong. Its texture was soft, and it almost felt like it was pulsating. Again, I noticed that there was nothing written on the spine or cover. Curiously, I added it to my stack of books and proceeded to the chair. Now, where to begin? Well, since someone seemed to have killed me because of my ties with the dead, necromancy seemed the logical place to start. Deciding to save the strange black book for later, I settled back and cracked open the thin dusty tome entitled A Study of Necromancy. Unfortunately, the book read like a National Geographic special. It was written in the third person by someone who had clearly only ever seen a necromancer. It sported such narratives as The Necromancer's Construct, a Slave of Their Will, and The Necromancer, Always Hidden. The rest of the book described the necromancers undead, but never necromancers themselves. I also noted that the description of the risen dead didn't sound anything like my own construct. Jack. The undead couldn't do anything without a necromancer puppeteering them, as where Jack was pretty much wholly independent of me, unless I gave him a direct command. I shut the unhelpful book in annoyance and tossed it on my reading table. I was about to grab the vampire book, hoping it would be more enlightening, when the black book caught my eye. Putting the vampire book aside, I grabbed it and cracked it open. The title on the first page read, The Book of the Dead. Visions of the movie Evil Dead filled my mind. Thankfully, it looked neither bound in human flesh nor inked in blood. I was about to flip the page when the door to the library creaked open. Looking up, I found Remy in his red robe. My blood instantly heated. "Here you are," he greeted with a lazy smile. "Hey," I replied, attempting to appear cool. "Sorry I went poking around. I woke up too early, but I found this library, so I decided to do some research," I said, pointing to the vampire books on the table next to me. "Excellent use of time," he nodded in approval. "I'm surprised you settled in the library instead of the entertainment room." "Entertainment room?" I asked. "Yes, it's just the next door up. There's a rather large television." My eyes widened. "You have a TV?" Remy smiled. "There's also a computer. I have not had much use for it, but the salesman insisted it was necessary in these modern times. My mother hadn't had a computer. It was just too expensive, so the idea of having one at my disposal was drool-worthy. I can show them to you, if I'm not interrupting your research, that is." I glanced at my little pile of books. I hadn't even cracked the vampire tomes yet, but the thought of television and a computer to play with was just too distracting. I heard there were a lot of interesting video games to be played that weren't available on home consoles. "I can come back to it later," I insisted and got up from my chair. Remy tried to hide a smirk, and failed. I rolled my eyes at him. Then something struck me. I'd had the black book in my lap when Remy had come in, but when I got up, it was gone. There was nothing on the floor around me. I looked back at the end table. Maybe I'd put it down? Sifting through my small literary pile, I found no trace of the thing. "Everything all right?" Remy asked in concern. "You can bring them with you if you like." "No, I just misplaced something," I muttered, wondering where the hell the book had gone. "I'll find it later," I assured him, and followed Remy out of the library. My lessons proceeded every night, and despite my initial resistance, I began to enjoy my time at Remy's place. The computer games helped. Though Remy certainly had his work cut out for him. It took a lot of trial and error for me to learn to control my new vampiric abilities. I also had some serious hang-ups about feeding from a live human, mainly the hunting part. Jack came along for training every now and again, though Remy admitted he wasn't the foremost expert on The Walking Dead. Jack and I had checked his library for information, but there wasn't much of value. Remy had been right. Jack definitely didn't fit the dumb, slobbery description of a ghoul or the traditionally mindless construct of a necromancer. Well, except for the occasional urge to do my bidding or drop dead when I yelled that at him in a fit of anger. Jack was stronger now, but I still didn't have any problem controlling him. Jack didn't have to avoid the sun, slow his movements, or learn to hunt for fresh blood. I couldn't help a small pang of jealousy. Everything always seemed so easy for Jack. Then again, maybe my annoying little sister side was just coming out. I'd looked for that little black book I'd started reading before. It seemed like a book of the dead might be helpful in this instance, but it disappeared. Even the copy I'd packed away with my books from home had gone missing. I would have asked Remy about it, but admitting that I may have lost one of his ancient books was a bit embarrassing. Though losing 2 books of the same type was pretty suspicious. I would have to do some research on book-stealing monsters. If werewolves and banshees existed, why not literature-pilfering gremlins? Jack and I soon found that being undead was pretty tolerable. We lived our lives in much the same way we always had. We just had a stranger nightlife. Especially me, since that was my only life. My Maker-Tyro relationship with Remy was progressing nicely, though some part of me felt like our training was becoming more intimate by the session. I didn't mind that, but was Remy feeling the same heat in his blood that I was whenever we spent time together? Nervously, I approached the young valet. He had just finished parking a nice sports car behind the Roosevelt Hotel in Hollywood. The young man was skinny with dark hair and eyes. As he finished locking the car, I appeared beside him. He smelled of some strong cologne, but I could sense his blood beneath it. It smelled particularly rich, like he ate a lot of meat. Remy told me I'd be able to pick out different things from the smell and taste of people's blood. Things like what they ate or drank, if they smoked or did drugs. If I was to guess, this kid was an all-American burger eater. The boy would do for my first encounter with feeding. I looked behind me momentarily. Remy was somewhere watching, making sure I didn't mess things up. Part of me was self-conscious, but the rest was happy he was near. Whether it was because I liked having him around or because I wanted him there in case I biffed it, I wasn't sure. When the boy finally noticed me, he jumped back in surprise. Damn it. My first live feeding and already I was messing it up. Remy said not to startle them. It put them on alert, which stressed them out, changing the flavor of their blood and making them skittish. "Oh, hello," the boy greeted me nervously. "Can I help you?" Remy had been right. I could smell the tangy scent of adrenaline flowing off of him. I wasn't a fan. It smelled gamey, like the flavor of rabbit or deer. Not my favorite, but I had to press on. I faltered. God, why was I so bad at this? "I'm just looking for my car." The boy looked at me in confusion, and I immediately knew that wasn't the right thing to say. Remy had told me to come up with a plausible excuse for a conversation. Of course, I hadn't thought about the fact that he was just fetching cars. "Well, do you have your ticket? If so, just go up to the valet stand." "Oh, I think I lost mine," I replied quickly, proud of myself for coming up with something on the fly. "Okay, what kind of car is it?" he asked me then. "Chevy," I replied, listing the first car manufacturer off the top of my head. "Okay, you know the model? Color?" he asked. I sighed. This was not helping me get close to him. I tried to think back on all the times I'd seen Rosetta flirt with guys. She could get one to kiss her in minutes flat depending on how much she'd had to drink. "It was a black car," I replied huskily, trying to imitate her. I made eye contact and then reached out to touch his arm. Upon touching him, his smell seemed to intensify. I could really sense his blood now, hear it circulating through his veins. The hair on his arm seemed to rise, and if I wasn't mistaken, his pupils dilated slightly. The boy suddenly looked like he was in some sort of trance. He relaxed and smiled dopily at me. Man, Rosetta's techniques really were effective. I guess this was my chance. I leaned into the boy, and my eyes focused on his neck. I could practically feel the blood pumping in the vein I was about to pierce with the fangs that were folding down from the roof of my mouth. I was all ready to go when the sudden vision of my first real feeding invaded my mind. I'd pounced on my poor brother, cracking his ribcage. My fangs had ripped into his neck, draining him of blood. My breath hitched as panic began to choke me. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I could almost see myself ripping this poor boy's throat out. An instant later, I was gone. I ran like the devil was chasing me, like I could get away from the terrible memory coursing through my mind. Lampposts blurred by me as I blindly rushed down the sparsely populated streets of Hollywood. Then, I was suddenly tackled and I found myself pinned to the floor in a nearby alleyway. I fought to get free, fought to breathe, fought to flee. Then I heard his voice. "Pandora," Remy called. "Please, be calm." I hesitated a moment and then looked up into bright silvery blue eyes. They were all I could see, and I felt myself relax. "You are all right. I have you," Remy's voice called, soothing me out of my haze. I wanted to reply, to let him know I could hear him, but I couldn't respond. I felt paralyzed by my sudden expenditure of energy. Remy pulled me into his arms, trying to soothe me back into my senses. After a while, my heart stopped hammering. Air came to me, and my mind seemed to clear. I pulled away from Remy and looked up at him. He smiled. "There you are. How are you feeling?" I stared at him, wondering what the hell had happened to me. "I'm fine now," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure if that was true. I still felt a bit shaky. "Sorry." "Do not apologize. No one is perfect their first time." "Yeah, but it wasn't my first time. It was my second." Remy sighed, knowing that I was talking about Jack. "Trauma, such as you experience, can sometimes be long-lasting. Vampires who have had a bad first feeding and no maker to help them correct it often continue feeding in such a way." "What?" I asked in panic. Remy stiffened. "This will not be the way for you," he assured me seriously. "We will figure this out. It may just take some time." I nodded dismally. "Now why don't I take you home so we can relax? You can feed from the cellar tonight, and we will try again another evening." I nodded, and Remy helped me to my feet. My mind felt like it was going in every direction at once. I was exhausted, but together we made our way back. Who knew that learning all this vampire stuff was going to be such a big pain in my ass?